At this juncture, what do you think is the potential for escalation in Ukraine versus de-escalation in Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, I think that things are going to continue to get worse for the foreseeable future, and I think it's doubtful that we're going to see a lot of major escalation beyond, say, the next several days. It's clear that Russia is determined to do a very kind of aggressive military action. They're, moving on Kiev, and the idea is to eventually take that city. So it seems like there is a really heroic fight by the Ukrainians going on, and that is set to continue for the foreseeable future.
If it does continue, what does that mean for the potential sanctions on Russia?
Yeah, I think, the Biden administration, they've already put extremely tough sanctions on Russia for doing this, but I think that they've still kind of left a few cards in their hand. They went out after some of Russia's biggest banks, but they could go after more of those Russian banks even harder. So really only one Russian bank, VTB, kind of got the full slate of the worst sanctions. And essentially those measures could be applied to other banks if Russia continues to move on Kiev.
Matthew, do you think Putin was counting on more cover from the likes of China or Czech leaders, for example, whose rhetoric has been maybe surprisingly critical of their move?
Yeah, I think that the Czech leader was certainly a surprise for Putin. I think that Putin expected a little bit more kind of hesitancy from certain Central European leaders. And I think inter-European unity has really surprised Putin in this sense. Regarding China, I think that's a kind of a different story. I think China, for its own reasons, really feels like it needs to not show any daylight between itself and Russia and Putin. So their hand is almost essentially forced in this case. And I don't really think that we're going to see much more daylight from China.
Do you think then that this conflict expands beyond Ukraine?
No, I don't think it does. I mean, I think that the Biden administration has kind of set up certain parameters to prevent that from happening. But I think it's clear that even what's going on right now is going to have a lot of implications for markets. I mean, we're talking about Ukraine and Russia, two major commodity producing countries of all kinds, everything from agriculture to minerals. And so it's clear that as this goes on and on, things are only going to get worse with regards to that. And I think an important point here is that the Russians are going to try to probably set up a pro-Russian puppet government in Ukraine that's going to not receive a lot of international recognition. That's a potential danger here. And if that government is not recognized widely, it could be hard for that Ukrainian government to sell its commodities and for them to reach the world market.
There's a couple of different schools of thought right now. One is that Russia and Putin have prepared for this moment, given all their reserves, the way they've sort of collected currencies and gold, and are prepared for a long slog. The other is that somehow, at this point, given the solidarity out of NATO, he's improvising in a way. Which is more true?
Oh, I think it's both. I think he had an idea of what he was getting into a long time ago, but now he's still holding out hope that eventually either the Ukrainians or the West is going to call him up and say, let's strike a deal, let's back down, you don't have to keep advancing on Kiev. And so he's holding out that hope. But I'm not necessarily sure that that's going to happen. But it's clear that kind of the Russians, they want to do this quickly, but they're trying to keep diplomatic channels, and they hope something like that could happen. So it's both planning and improvisation.
But given if, things do come to fruition in the way that you've laid out, if there is a puppet government in Ukraine installed by the Russians that isn't effective in exporting its commodities elsewhere, doesn't that create some sort of leverage on the Russians to not do that?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, that's kind of the issue. They know that this government that they would theoretically try to set up in eastern Ukraine or in most of Ukraine would be very economically unviable. And so that's one of the things that's kind of pushing the Russians against this idea of occupying large pieces of Ukraine. But on the other hand, they've made it clear that they also want a regime change. So I think that they're going for regime change, but they could still kind of feel this out. And if things really kind of start to look bad in their own economy, they might pull the plug and say, well, maybe this is not actually worth the cost that we're going to incur.